to change this really fast. How are we going to move from this kind of number of people and, as already mentioned, 24 councillors with 25 council seats? How do we move from that to become a really big party? First thing to do is to look at this election just gone. And loads of people say, well, how on earth? I was over in, since the election I've been in France and with colleagues of ours in America. And both places people have said, well, how on earth did so many British people vote for that appalling crook Blair? You know, everything he's done to your country, and in particular that outrageous illegal war that got nothing to do with us. How do people still vote for him, all those millions of Brits? And what I've been able to say to them is, well, just look at the figures actually. First of all, only 21.5% of the British population, the electorate, voted for Tony Blair. So it's only just over 1 in 5. There's still a fair few. But then if you actually break down the figures, if you've ever been involved in a British National Party by-election campaign, when the Labour Party pull out all the stops, you see all these postal votes and they're Labour Party postal votes. Loads of them are fraudulent completely. Most of the ones that aren't have got another way. They get the Labour councillor into a nursing home where there's 30 or 50 or 60 little old ladies who don't have the faintest idea what planet they're on anymore, poor old girls. You know, they're lovely, they're someone's granny and all the rest of it, but they don't know what day of the week it is. And the Labour councillor goes in and votes for them. Now in one nursing home it doesn't mean much, but you multiply that by home after home after home after home, it's a big block of votes. When you're on the polling station in those by-elections, come 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the evening, they bus all these old pensioners of both sexes there, and these are people who vote Labour because they've always voted Labour, just as their mum and their dad always voted Labour. Shame on you, Richard. You should know better. But you don't even have to discount them. Out of that 21.5%, about 8% of our electorate is third world immigrant. Now this time around, some of them voted Lib Dem, because lots of Muslims voted Lib Dem because they're against Blair's war in Iraq, just like we are, for rather different reasons. But overall still, all over the country, all the asylum seekers, and they get the right to vote, you know. The moment they set foot in this country, they have the right to vote in this country, as long as they can convince a returning officer that they don't intend to go back. Well, you know, yes, I want to go. I've said I'm here to avoid being tortured to death, so yeah, I'm going back tomorrow. You know? So they have no problem at all. They've been allowed in, they get the right to vote. And plus, the ones who've been here rather longer, let's face it, the Labour Party is the party of the immigrants, in every way, shape and form. So despite the fact that rather more this time voted Lib Dem, you look at the, you know, okay, Jack Straw got back on a reduced majority, but he still got back with a huge majority. So lots of them still vote Labour. I guess out of the 8 or 9%, well more than half of them. So the number of British people, English, Scots, Irish, Welsh, real British people who voted Labour is actually something more like 16%. And then if you actually looked, as I say, some of those are elderly folk who I'm afraid don't know anything about the world anymore, because that's how old they are. 15% actually probably of the consciously aware British population voted for Blair. It's not very much, is it? Now we're nearer to 1 in 8. On top of that, if you actually look at the people who vote for them, there's 2 big blocks that the Labour Party's built its support on in recent years. There's the utterly useless spongers, the people who live off the taxes of hard-working men and women who are struggling desperately to get enough to keep a family together, and we all get taxed to the hilt for that. 66 new tax increases in the last government alone. That's new taxes, in fact, not tax increases. 66 new taxes under the last government alone. And it all comes out, it doesn't come out of the pockets of the millionaires, the billionaires, the ones who give £500,000 to the Labour Party and are made lords the next year. It doesn't come out of their pockets. Those people have all got accountants and offshore tax havens. Those people don't pay taxes. It's ordinary people, us, who pay taxes. But there's some people who leach taxes. There's all the spongers, and yeah, we're importing them from all over the world, but let's face it, we've got plenty of spongers of our own as well. White trash, who are just there to leech on other people and think the world owes them a living. And they've been having loads of kids, at the expense of ordinary working people for several generations now, and there's loads of them. So we in the British National Party don't just ever, we don't blame the foreigners. We blame the government that's brought the foreigners in, but even if it wasn't for them, this government and the one before, they've still done all sorts of things which are helping to foul up this country, and part of it is creating a welfare underclass. And the reason that the Labour Party loves the welfare underclass is that some of them vote Labour because they know if they vote for anybody else, or they fear if they vote for anyone else, they might get some of their benefits cut. Actually, they wouldn't. Unless they vote for anyone else except for us. When we get in, we're going to pay a lot more money to people on the dole in exchange for work. The amount of money that people at present get in low-paid jobs is not worth working. Some families can't afford to work. It's an absolute disgrace. We're going to give people a lot more money for 4 days a week work instead of 7 days a week on the dole. On the 1 day in the week, in the working week, they can be out there looking for jobs. And in the new economy we're going to build, there's going to be more jobs. So we're going to get rid of the spongers by giving them a chance to work properly. And if some absolutely want to sponge after that, well, that's fine, let them sponge. But on charity, not out of our pockets, not at all. Most people at present, if they can be bothered to drag themselves off in front of the settee, or the settee in front of one of these giant televisions, they can be bothered to do that, they'll vote Labour to keep their hands in our pockets. But there's a bigger block that votes Labour, and it's the middle class caring professions, the social worker types. Some of them are very decent people actually, trying very hard to do a very difficult job in especially places where you've got a population of foreigners who think that young white girls are legitimate sexual prey. That makes very hard work for social workers in some of the towns and cities of the north of England. But by and large, these people themselves are sponges who get by, and they get their money, and they get lots of money, for looking after people who are too lazy or incompetent to look after themselves at our expense. And there's a huge network of welfare state parasites, wealthy, well-to-do graduates out of British universities which don't teach anything any use anymore, nothing which actually helps us make things, but just teach them loads of nonsense about how the poor and oppressed are poor and oppressed because people oppress them and not because they're basically incompetent or lazy. And these people, they're going to vote Labour because Labour is the party of this big giant welfare state that gobbles up more and more of the taxes of ordinary hard-working families and of pensioners and so on. So they're going to vote Labour too. When you take out of the Labour vote the two ends of the spongers system, if you found 10% of ordinary British people who vote Labour, I'd be quite amazed. I really would. Which indicates that the British people aren't that bad after all. Because in fact, some 90% of ordinary Brits, the people that we recognise as our kith and kin, already don't vote Labour. It's as simple as that. If you went back 30 years, something like 75% of the population always voted. The 25% above that, the last 25%, just can't be bothered at all. Whether they're too stupid or too lazy or whatever, I don't know. But in the last 20, 30 years, fully a quarter of the whole population had given up voting. Why? Because they look at all politicians and think, well, they're all useless, they're all corrupt, they're all in it for themselves, they've all had a turn in government, either locally or nationally, they've all contributed to fouling this country up, why should I bother to vote for them? Which actually isn't a very silly argument, is it? It's an entirely realistic way of looking at things. And they give up on it. And huge numbers of people, most of all in that last election, were voting either because they hated Blair and thought, well, voting Tory might get him out, or because they remember what the last Tory government was like, and they can't stand the thought of that. So even though they're not very keen on Blair, they still voted for Blair to keep the Tories out. And both blocs, actually, if they had a free chance to vote for a set of policies, especially without the label, they'd vote for us. We all know that, actually. Everybody knows that. It's been the case for years. The question is, then, how we get this potential for us. People are sick of the present government, and despite how awful it is, they weren't prepared to vote for the Tories, or for the Lib Dems, the new Muslim party, to replace the Labour Party, but they wouldn't vote for us. What's going to change that? A few things. First of all, I'm going to put my hand up first to say I'm in debt, my family's in debt. How many people here are in debt?